Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Cardinal Crimes. In today's episode, we are actually going to be revisiting a previous conversation we had, and that is with Janine Latus. She is an author and a domestic violence survivor. In this previous conversation that we had, we discussed her book titled If I Am Missing or Dead, A Sister's Story of Love, Murder, and Liberation. In the first recording that we did when I published it, the audio was not the best. I have since fixed that, so I wanted to republish it. So I hope that you enjoy this episode if you have not heard it already. It's a fantastic conversation. Janine has been through so much. Her book is incredible. It's very emotional. And let me know what you think. In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Janine Latus, welcome to the podcast. You are an award-winning journalist, domestic violence survivor, an advocate, and a New York Times bestselling author. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Absolutely. I want to thank you so much for coming on. And your book, If I Am Missing or Dead, A Sister Story of Love, Murder, and Liberation, I read that book in like 2 days. It was phenomenal and tragic and eye-opening, but also very relatable. Um, I think that everyone who reads it, women and even men, could find an aspect of your book that they can relate to in some way. Can you talk a little bit about your book and the stories you share in it?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for the compliment. I'm glad I'm sorry that any of it resonates with you, but I'm glad that it was an easy read.
Yes.
Um, yeah, it tells the story of two sisters who are raised in such a way that they fall for angry and controlling men. And one of them breaks free and thrives, but the other one is murdered by her live-in boyfriend. And I am the sister who survived. And I and the rest of my family had to go try to find my sister's body.
Wow. And what has it's been a while since you published this book, is that correct?
Correct.
And what was the response like when you published it?
New York Times bestseller, London Times bestseller, Toronto Globe and Mail, translated into Mandarin and Sri Lankan and Dutch and German, but also a lot of emails, people saying, I can see myself,
Wow.
or now I recognize what's going on. And my very, very, very favorite comment is always, my sister handed it to me because she knows I'm in an abusive relationship and I couldn't hear her until I read this book, and now I see it.
Wow.
Because that's why I wrote it. Because, there's an old Harriet Tubman quote that's attributed to Harriet Tubman, but not necessarily said by Harriet Tubman. I saved 1,000 slaves. I would have saved 1,000 more if they had known they were slaves. Because when you're in the middle of an abusive relationship, it's really hard to see it for what it is. So I wrote the book so that people would see it for what it is.
Absolutely. I think that's so common um, with individuals that have gone through this experience. Just a few weeks ago, I spoke with a woman named Leah who had been in an abusive relationship as a teenager. And she said if she had just understood what was healthy and what wasn't in relationship dynamics, that she would have, obviously understood earlier what was happening. She said it took a really long time, even after that relationship, for her to understand that what she was going through wasn't normal. Um, Now, at what point in your life, or when writing this book, did you come to understand that you weren't alone in those experiences that you were having?
Um, I don't think I understood what was going on in my own life until Amy was killed. And then I started really, really looking into, are you familiar with the Duluth Power and Control Wheel?
A little bit. I can't remember the exact concepts of it, but
So it's a pie, and it depicts the various forms of abuse because so many people believe that abuse begins when somebody gets punched or slapped. But the truth is that it includes financial control and sexual control and cyber manipulation, excessive monitoring, jealousy, using the kids against you, using your position in society against you, until by the time you get hit, you've already been told you're stupid and you're fat and you're ugly and unlovable. Nobody else will ever want you. And then you get hit and you're like, well, I mean, I'm unlovable. And so, of course, I got hit. I mean, it's really a layering of controlling behaviors, usually before it becomes physical at all.
Absolutely. And that was something that really stuck out to me in your book is there's these themes that you bring up over and over again about your self-worth and your, body image and all of that. And a lot of those ideas I feel like started, at least from what I understood in the book, when you were pretty young. And those types of influences, I feel like were coming from everywhere. I mean, comments that your father would make, what you were being taught in church, what you were hearing other men saying. Um, what are the earliest memories you have where you began being concerned with your self image and your self worth?
Actually, I think all of us get pretty self conscious at, let's say, 12, you know, depending on whether you develop and whether your peers develop and all those things that make you self conscious. I was particularly aware of it when I was 12 because I was sexually assaulted when I was 12. And then my father's reaction to it made me believe that it was my fault. And I was like this 78-pound little girl. And the man who did it to me was an adult. And it wasn't my fault, but I understood from that point forward that it was my fault. And whatever happened to me was my fault.
Absolutely. And see, yeah, there's all these influences coming towards you. You're being told that it's your fault. Like you said, you're being told that you're worthless and all of that. And so it's almost like the cycle, then the abuse starts. You're already conditioned to think this way about yourself. And then the abuse, I would imagine, just kind of makes those feelings and thoughts worse. It was that your experience?
See, the thing is that by the time you're being abused, I mean, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense. Of course, I heard him wrong. Of course, I'm exaggerating. Of course, I need to get a sense of humor. You know, it's the same messages I received from my father. My dad also did this thing that I did not know was horrible until much later, which was he would tickle us until we cried. And no matter how much, stop, 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 he didn't stop, which taught us that people get to touch our bodies even when we don't want them to. And our ability to stop we were absolutely powerless.
The relationship you talk about with your dad in the book is really interesting to me because on the one hand there's certain memories that you share, like him teaching you how to change a tire, that seem very typical dad, but then there's also these other behaviors that are pretty disturbing. Where do you think that came from with him? Like, why do you think he was that way?
Okay, so I deliberately put in normal stuff like changing a tire or teaching me to swim because whenever you're with an abuser, most of the time it's great.
Hmm.
One of the analogies I use on the stage is being in an abusive relationship is like you're walking down a long hallway and 2 days a week somebody steps out and punches you. And you don't know which day it'll be, but you had 5 good days, right? And those 5 good days give you hope. And during those 5 good days, they're saying to you, I'll never do it again. Or, don't tell me not to leave my wet towel on the floor and that'll never happen again. And so with my dad, he did a lot of very normal things, dad things that you would expect a dad to do. Um, oh, shoot, I forgot the question.
Oh, just why do you think it was that he, like, where do you think that sort of behavior came from with him?
There's a whole lot of people who would like to know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
I mean, the family has discussed it and discussed it, and anything we come up with is purely hypothetical. His siblings were not like this.
Hmm. I hear a lot, I think especially with, like, maybe older men that, well, he's just a product of the times. What do you make of that kind of sentiment when people try to use that as like an excuse?
I'm appalled by it because so what? You can be living in a culture where men treat women poorly. That doesn't give you a pass to treat women poorly. You're responsible for yourself and your actions. But interestingly, people ask me often whether, how's my relationship with my mom since my mom didn't protect us from dad. And I am aware that mom couldn't get a credit card in her own name. And mom couldn't get a mortgage in her own name. And she wasn't allowed to work without permission. And there was nobody to watch all these damn kids because, there wasn't birth control. So, of course, there were a bunch of kids. And so mom didn't leave dad when I was young, but it wouldn't be the same as me leaving my husband because I have, a credit score of my own for starters, and I could leave. I could walk out the door and have a safe place to live and stay in a hotel. But my mom did not have that option.
Absolutely. And that you also talked about some comments that your father had made. Uh, well, it was comments to you, but sort of like towards your mother. And there was like certain behaviors, I think, that kind of showed that their relationship probably was also not the healthiest. Is that
Right.
correct? My way of
My
thinking.
mother talks about it often now,
Mm-hmm.
about how awful it was. Yeah.
And how did you growing up with seeing that dynamic between your parents, did that come up at all for you in your own relationships?
Well, sure. Because when you're early in a relationship, right, you're telling your partner everything. And so if you tell your partner that you're self conscious because your dad always made fun of you for being flat chested, eventually your partner, if they're not a good person, is going to use it against you and say, I know it bothers you. I know
Mm-hmm.
it bothers you. I'm willing to love you even though you're flat chested, but nobody else will. Like they will find the thing you're self conscious about. My dad used to joke that my feet were so big, it's amazing I didn't quack when I walked. And so my ex husband would sometimes quack just because he knew, he thought it was funny, but it was something that hurt me. And so it's not funny if it's something that hurts the person.
Yeah, that's it kind of makes you think of like, I feel like when I was reading it, I was kind of like replaying all these interactions that I've had in my own life, and it starts to make you wonder, and then you think back and you're like, why did I allow that kind of behavior to continue? And I think so many people have that question, and it's kind of like one of those cliche questions, like, why didn't I do anything about it? What do you think people don't understand about individuals who are in those types of relationships and situations?
Subtlety,
Mm-hmm.
subtlety. So people talk about red flags, and I do not talk about red flags. Like you see red flags. These are much more subtle than that.
Mm-hmm.
They're the correction, you know, oh, your jokes aren't funny. So you learn not to tell jokes out in public, or, you know, just something as simple as you're not going to go out with me dressed like that. Well, that leaves a scar on me because now I feel like I'm being judged by the one person who's supposed to accept me, and that their desire for me to look a certain way is more important than my desire to be comfortable and look the other way. My husband used to say to me when I would like wear jeans and a sweatshirt, if you don't want to have sex, you should just say so. So that'll train you. That'll train you to not wear what I should have said to him was, your loss. I'm comfortable right now. If I don't get to have sex unless I'm wearing stilettos, so I have to be uncomfortable in order to have sex, then that's not the deal. That's not a fair deal at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're so right on that, is like the red flags, we always are talking about these red flags and looking out for these red flags. And it's like, oh, if he's, punching holes in walls and doing stuff like that and is like easily angered. And it's like, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. But a lot of the behaviors in the early days of the relationships you talked about in your book, yeah, they were so much more subtle and things that you just wouldn't really be able to identify because it doesn't fit those regular red flags that we're always taught about. Um, Now, in your book,
Well,
yeah, go
I'll
ahead.
tell you another one though,
Mhm.
is jealousy.
Mm.
Okay. We in our culture have movies and songs about jealousy that are so romantic. It's so romantic. They're jealous, or they ask you out and you say no, and they ask you out and you say no, and they keep asking till you realize you meant yes all along.
Mhm.
Think about all the movie plots that are that one.
Yep.
And so you know, we romanticize jealousy, but I got to ask you, where is the line between sweet romantic jealousy and controlling behavior?
Absolutely. And there are so many movies where it's like, oh, well, she's playing hard to get. It's like, is she playing hard to get, or does she just not want to talk to you? You know what I mean?
Right.
And
Right.
it's
Has she been very clear what she wants? Yes, she
yeah.
has.
And about jealousy, that Leah that I had spoke with a couple weeks ago, she talked about jealousy a lot in her relationship, and where now she views it where it's like jealousy can be like a normal thing, but it's not something that you need to change in order to fix it for them. You know what I mean? Like,
Exactly.
yeah, like I could, maybe feel jealousy about someone, but that's like my issue. It's like something I need to work on, and like, why am I jealous about that? It's probably something to do more with like an insecurity on my part. So I do think that's an area where we need to improve in our society, and kind of how we talk about domestic violence are those subtle behaviors and things like jealousy and healthy relationship dynamics where, stuff like jealousy might come up in a relationship, but it's like, how do you work through that? And how do you identify? Because, like you said, it's a very kind of unclear line where is it normal jealousy or is it very controlling? So I think that's something really important. And I don't know how to talk to, young people about that. It's really difficult.
Well, I like what you said, the idea that, your jealousy is not my problem.
Right.
I'm not, having sex with this individual over here. End of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to come home and reassure the hell out of you if that would make us both happy, but I'm not going to not be friends with that person. You know, when I'm on stage, I'll talk about how my husband was so scared of losing me, just terrified of losing me. And so every time I would talk to a man, he would say, well, the only reason they want to talk to you is because they want to have sex with you. And therefore, I learned not to talk to other men. But then your girlfriends, they're a bunch of man haters.
Mm.
And family, we're family now. Because abusers isolate. They make your life smaller and smaller and smaller. And you know this, but your partner is supposed to help you blossom like into the biggest version of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What are your wants? What are your dreams? How can I help you get there? They're not supposed to make you like hide behind the radiator when you hear the garage door open.
Right. Right. Like being in a relationship and you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells, like, okay, like I gotta worry about the way I phrase something because I don't want to upset them. It's like, okay, I feel like that's another kind of subtle, red flag that we don't talk about enough. It's almost something that is somewhat normalized, I think, in relationships, but you shouldn't feel that way, around someone you're with if it's like in a healthy relationship. Um,
Right, right. And if you're wondering which version is coming through the door,
mm-hmm.
the garage door opened. Is it going to be the one who adores me and says, wow, that dinner smells wonderful and, hugs me on the way by? Or is it going to be the one who puts a fist through the drywall?
Right.
And if you don't know, then you're amped up. Your cortisol system is amped up and you're anxious all the time. But you also know that if you just do it right this time, then nothing bad will happen.
Mm-hmm.
You know what intermittent reinforcement is?
I don't.
It's there's rat research, and if the rat presses the little bar and every time they press it they get a pellet, they get bored and stop pressing it. And if they press it and they never get a pellet, then they give up and quit trying. But if they get one every once in a while, they'll press that thing until their nose is bloody, just like when somebody's playing the slot machines.
Mm-hmm.
It's intermittent reinforcement, and it is the strongest form of enforcement. And so if you are afraid that one of these days he's going to miss putting his fist to the wall and put it to your face instead, you are going to behave. And that is controlling behavior.
Absolutely. And I feel like with a lot of these types of relationships too, you follow what you know that they want you to do, but then at some point the goalpost keeps moving and it's like they're kind of changing what they want from you. And so it's almost like you can never win in a lot of these scenarios. Um, so in your book, we not only follow your story and it's coming from your point of view, obviously, but we also get these glimpses of your sister, Amy, your younger sister. We get glimpses of her life and just these like passing moments as, you know, they're coming from your point of view. Um, there are moments when, you know, you're encouraging her to leave her relationship. There are moments where you're telling her she can do better. And there's moments when she's also doing the same for you. But it seems like you're both at this moment where neither of you want to push too hard. Why do you think there tends to be this hesitation to pry or push someone too hard, especially when it comes to kind of your perception that they're in an unhealthy relationship?
It's it's delicate because if I pushed too hard, and if I push too hard on anybody who's going through this and they get defensive, they're not going to hear me.
Mm-hmm.
But also they may shut me out, and then they're more isolated again, which makes them more vulnerable to the controlling, abusive person. Um, Plus, you know, it's awkward. It's really awkward to say to somebody, hey, but what I do encourage people to do is bear witness, you know, so especially with things like emotional abuse, because with physical abuse, you know, you're not supposed to be hit. And if you get a bruise, somebody will call you on it, and somebody will, you know, there's ways to get attention for that. But let's say you're at a party and somebody tells a joke that clearly hurts your friend's feelings. You know, like the girlfriend says a joke that hurts the boyfriend. If you go to the boyfriend and you say, "Oh, I saw that, man. That would have hurt my feelings. You okay?" Then later, when the abuser is saying that didn't happen, or you're overreacting, or you should have had a sense of humor, they know somebody else saw it.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps strengthen them from the inside. So there's bearing witness. And then there's also having faith in the person. Like if I told you to get out, you know, whoever you're in love with, you're in love with.
Mm-hmm.
And you might like me just fine, but you're in love with them. And they are telling you this truth, which is that you're unlovable. And, you know, you're pick, you know, pick the bad thing that makes you self-conscious. And they will be telling you, the victim, that. And I say, get out. And you're like being told by another person what to do. Instead, I encourage people to empower, to say, I know, Becca, that you have the wisdom to do what's right for yourself and for your children. I know that you have the strength to do this, and I am right here by your side as you're doing it. And here are some resources, including the Duluth Power and Control Wheel, and I'm here. And if you stay, I'm here. And if you leave, I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
Because you do not want to participate in isolation. And the Duluth Power and Control Wheel, I really like to have people print it out on paper and then hand them a highlighter. Because when you see all that yellow ink on the page, you can't lie to yourself anymore.
Mm-hmm. I just a couple weeks ago I talked with a woman, Dr. Jacqueline Campbell. She's a researcher in domestic violence, and she was actually one of the original contributors to the Violence Against Women Act. And through her research, she developed something called the Danger Assessment Tool. And I had never heard of it before. I don't know if you've heard of it. Um, it's online and you can access it. And she works a lot. She works in the nursing field, so it's something that it was developed with nurses, and they sat down with women who had been in violent relationships and whatever. But it's basically a series of questions, and you answer them, whatever, and it at the end gives you this kind of score of how at risk you are for abuse escalating into homicide, which I thought was just fascinating. It's that's kind of her area of expertise, is like physical outcomes of abusive relationships, and obviously the worst being homicide. Um, and I thought that was really interesting. And she had kind of talked about how um, a lot of the times when someone's in a relationship like that, they can't quite see how things are escalating, and they can't quite like see it for themselves. And so not only is there this questionnaire, and they took a lot of care to frame the questions in a way that you know, the words weren't like, does your partner strangle you? It was like, she was like, well, women aren't going to say that they are being strangled. They might, phrase it more as like, well, he will occasionally choke me, even though, the word choke isn't, it's not really what's happening and stuff like that. So they took a lot of care to do that. But then they also developed this calendar where it's like, okay, try to think back to all the days where something happened. And so you can see for yourself, it's like, you might think in your head, oh, this actually, it's not that often. But then if you see it on a calendar, you're like, okay, actually, this is happening a lot more. So I thought that was really fascinating, and a great tool.
I I love that, and the thing I recommend is journaling
Mm-hmm.
because it's the same idea. He said he'd never do it again, and then 3 days later he said he'd never do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Or I've tried my hardest not to mention that you know that he's eating with his mouth open, but still he's mad at me.
Right.
And you'll see it over and over and over again. And journaling, keeping a calendar, because you got to put it out there. Like if one of my friends was telling me about a relationship I had, I'd be like, you don't deserve that. But when it's your own life, you feel like maybe you do. So if you can read it on a piece of paper, it's almost like reading it as a character in a book, and therefore it can be easier to see.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
one thing I found interesting about your book was kind of that dynamic where you're seeing a little bit of what's happening with Amy, and it's you are telling her to leave, but at the same time it's like a lot of those concerning things are also happening to you. Why do you think it was so hard for you to see it when you could clearly know that, when you knew that something was, potentially going on with Amy?
I think it could be something as horrible as I was winning. I was the fitness expert on TV, super lean. I was married to the doctor. I had my own successful career. And obviously, what's happening to my sister, whose life is pretty much the opposite of that, can't possibly be happening to me
Mm,
because we're that different. But the thing is we both had body dysphoria. I'm like I had what do they call it, workout anorexia.
mm-hmm,
And she was obese,
mm-hmm.
and it was neither one of us just lived in our bodies. We were harming our bodies. Yeah.
You
I,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, it's implied but not stated in the book that Amy was the victim of childhood sexual assault. And some people who are sexually assaulted as children hide behind a lot of weight,
Mm,
because then nobody's going to try to touch them. And we think that's what happened with Amy.
wow. um you It's interesting you bring up kind of the differences in like your lifestyles and everything, and how maybe that was a factor why you couldn't quite see really what was going on with you. You talk a lot in your book about this fear of being considered a battered woman. Can you talk about what like what was your perception of what that meant at the time?
Well, I mean, if you're a battered woman, it's because you're, I don't know, unworthy of love, making stupid choices, not holding up your own boundaries. I honestly was probably in that group of people who believe that domestic abuse happens to them. You know,
Mm-hmm.
different race, different socioeconomic class, different religion, different cultural expectation. Um, because I lived on, I don't know, a third of an acre, you didn't hear the neighbors fight. So you had to figure they were fighting just as much as we were. We just couldn't hear them. The level of delusion is so high, and you have so much to lose. When I ended that marriage, I had a 3-year-old and a big house, and I'm self-employed, and I don't know how I'm going to pay for anything. There's a lot to lose.
Mm-hmm.
But on the flip side, if you're poor, you can't just go. Like I could just go, but if you imagine taking your children to a shelter, they're living with strangers, you're admitting that you're a battered woman. They may not be able to get to their own school. So you either have to move them to a different school or pull them out of school for a while. It's just so many barriers.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think though, Um, that's something that I think people forget, especially when, people have that response like, well, why didn't she just leave? Why didn't they just leave? It's like, one, that just always bothers me, but there's so many things, and also like the isolation, you're sometimes financially dependent on the person. Like, when you understand the reasons why people sometimes have to stay in those relationships, it makes total sense. um
I'll add something to that,
yes.
actually. They also know how to handle it,
Mm-hmm.
right? I know how to do this. I know how to not mention the thing that'll make him blow up. I know how to not say the wrong thing most of the time. If I leave, I'm going out into the world and I'm unlovable and I'll be alone for the rest of my life and I'll be broke and I got to raise these kids by myself. It is such a high hurdle to just think, oh my God, how am I going to do this? I don't know how to do this. Where
Mm-hmm.
will I live? How will I pay the bills? It's enormous for people to have to make those kind of decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, like you said, you're in a relationship where there's a routine. Although it's not healthy, you know how to kind of navigate it for the most part. And it's like, if you're to leave, it's this entire world where you're like, I don't know how to navigate it. It's a completely new routine. Like, what am I going to do? So you almost want to stay in that comfort zone a little bit, even though it's hurting you. Um, so on July 9th of 2002, you got a phone call saying that your sister Amy was missing. Um, and your response was immediately to say that bastard killed her. Can you talk about what led up to that moment to make this your gut response?
It's weird. There were very few overt signs that
Mm-hmm.
Amy was in an abusive relationship because Amy didn't want us to know. And so she told a little bit to this person and a little bit to that person. And only in putting all the pieces together were we all able to go, oh my God. Because Amy had had cancer. And when she called us, we came. So she knew we'd come if she
Mm-hmm.
called. And she did not call us. But there were things like she had admitted to me that, he had priors. And she was adamant that he'd never hurt anybody. There'd been he stole a truck, he had a bunch of DWIs, but he'd never hurt anybody. And so she had uh, borrowed money and bought him a dually, like that huge pickup truck with the two sets of wheels in the back, and a utility trailer and ladders and tarps and sprayers. He was able to start a house painting business on her dime. So, I mean, there were things that concerned me. And then her not showing up was so out of character for her that's when I just thought, ah, shit,
Mm-hmm.
we didn't see it coming, and it happened.
Yeah. I thought it was when when it's discovered that she had written that letter and taped it to her desk, and she, I mean, literally lays out like, if I go missing or if I'm murdered, like, this is the guy that did it. What did you think when you found out about that letter?
Well, Becca, it was dated 10 weeks before we found it.
Mm.
And so for 10 weeks, we'd been talking about my divorce and our nieces and nephews and movies, and she hadn't told me. And so there was this surge of what didn't I ask? And was I so selfish that I didn't pay attention to what was going on in her life? And eventually, when I found out that nobody knew, it was a little bit easier, a little bit less self blame than when I thought it was just me. But then there's anger, like, hey, you've known all along you were in danger and you didn't tell us.
Mm-hmm.
And now we can't save you. I mean, it was a combination of guilt and anger and loss. And that's a very painful combination.
Yeah, I can imagine. I just get teary eyed thinking about it. That point in the book is just, it's so devastating, because you just wonder how many other people are in these situations where they feel like they, well, it's like, I don't even know if they feel like they can't reach out to someone, but they're just unwilling to. I don't know. It's just so, I don't know. It's just so hard to think about. Um,
So I've gotten emails from at least a dozen people saying, there's a letter like that in the safe at work, or there's a letter I mailed to my mom and told her, don't open it unless you have to. And so you know that there are people out there who are aware that they're in a dangerous situation and they're trying to warn the world, but they're not ready to get out.
Yeah. I think that's also one of the reasons it's so important to tell these types of stories. I know for a while it was something that was considered taboo, like you didn't talk about this kind of stuff. Um, I mean, when we're looking at like the fight to end domestic violence, or, you know, however you want to phrase it, where do you think we've made the most progress?
I think talking.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I when I'm giving speeches, I wear a T-shirt that says "We need to talk,"
Yeah.
because the idea that what happens in the home stays in the home got my sister killed.
Mm-hmm.
But also, just the more we talk about it, the more people will understand that you get to say no when somebody wants to touch you, and that you can set a boundary around, no, your jealousy is not my problem.
Yeah.
I get to be friends with whomever I'm friends with, regardless of whether it scares you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm happy to have a conversation to reassure you, but I'm not going to not be friends with my friends.
Yeah.
I allowed my life to get super small. Like, I was only going to the gym and coaching little league, but I wasn't. And every time I got a professional success, my husband, can I cuss on this?
Yes. Go for it.
Um, yeah, I would get something would happen. Like, I would get a story on NPR, and my husband would say, "That's because he wants to fuck you." And it would be any accomplishment. That's because he wants to fuck you. And that's really degrading. It buys into my dad's idea that the only thing females are worth, anything for is sex, and you've got to withhold sex because it's the only thing you have of value and it's precious, and you got to keep it so your husband can own it. And you know, so so him saying they only want to fuck you both degraded my skill set, because I was accomplishing things at a high level, and yet I'm being told that's because I've got breasts, I guess. You know,
And
it was degrading.
yeah, and you almost think that's just like another tactic to try to like isolate you, because you wonder if, you know, whether his intent or subconsciously he was like, okay, if I can just try to make her feel worthless and her professional accomplishments, maybe she'll tone it down a little bit, step back, and then that's just more control that they have over you. That's,
Yep.
oh gosh.
Years after my divorce,
Mm-hmm.
I was offered a job at two different universities simultaneously. And one of the universities was a higher quality college and would have had higher quality incoming students. And that job offer, there'd been a man on campus who showed me around, and he was really excited. And he's like, "You can start a new journalism program." And he's all pumped up and he's dragging me around campus and he's really excited. And the other one hired me sight unseen. And I went with the sight unseen because obviously they weren't offering it just because they wanted to fuck me. That stuff sticks in your brain a long time. And, you know, I can tell you that having your nose broken or your ribs broken hurts, but you heal.
Mm-hmm.
But being told that the only reason you're achieving is because somebody wants to have sex with you, that it takes forever to get rid of that.
One of the things I always want to look at is, you know, interventions or prevention. And I feel like a lot of the work in domestic violence prevention, I feel like, is put on women. Or at least we've been the ones, you know, shepherding that journey and bringing awareness to it and whatever. What do you think men can do to, I don't know, hold other men accountable? And, you know, and I don't want to minimize the fact that men can also be in abusive relationships, but when we're looking at abuse towards women, which is perpetrated mostly by men, uh, what do you think men need to do or change, or whatever, to kind of help with this fight against violence?
Well, and also, aside from women shepherding it, it's women who take the crappy paying jobs at shelters
Mm-hmm.
and carry other women through this
Yep.
forever. You know, um, I think that when I work with athletic teams at college level, one of the things that I'm trying to train the young men to do is like, dude, that's not cool.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, you're making men look bad. You need to knock it off. Or you're not going to treat somebody like that in front of me. That ain't happening. So that they normalize healthy behaviors. If somebody, this is kind of off tangent, but if somebody makes a gay joke and you laugh at it,
Mm-hmm.
then I know I can't come to you and tell you I'm gay.
Right.
And you reinforcing the idea that being gay is something that's worth joking about. Likewise, when men do something shitty to a woman and their buddies are like, well, I can't say anything because that would be awkward, then they're letting it happen and therefore they make it seem like it's normal behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to give audience members words that they can use because that conversation is awkward, right? But it lasts like, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Wishing you'd had that conversation, that lasts the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
If, yeah. So, men have to hold other men to high standards.
I think that's such a good point. And I read a lot about, if someone makes, a homophobic or transphobic joke or, is some other joke that's, clearly not a joke, to just kind of call them out and be like, can you explain like what's funny about that? Like, can you explain your joke? And then having them
Mhm.
dig a little deeper and you're like, okay, like, yeah, that's not funny at all, actually. And I think that's, I don't know.
I think it's great
Yeah.
because it's in that line of, okay, I didn't get why that was funny. Help me out. And then they're like, I mean, it's funny because, he has sex with guys. Okay. And how's that funny? Yeah.
Right. Because eventually they have to either out loud or in their own head get to the point where they're like, oh, okay. Like, at least you hope
Yeah.
that they come to that realization where, I don't know. And you wonder, I feel like a lot of people that make those jokes or they know what they're saying is harmful, but, uh, well, I don't want
Well, so
to go ahead.
I also suggest people swap in, say, race.
Yeah.
Would you, because we know better
Mm-hmm.
now than to degrade one race by making jokes about it. So swap that in. If it doesn't fly for Black people, then it doesn't fly for gay people.
Right.
Yeah.
100%.
So many jokes about women. For example, the idea that she slept her way to the top.
Mm-hmm.
No, 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 no. The boss required her to give them a blowjob as part of her ability to keep her job. Put the responsibility where it belongs.
100%.
Yeah.
I think even, I think of, the presidential election and just some of the horrible things and like memes and things online about Kamala Harris and and it all very sexual, trying to degrade her sexually. You would never see that kind of meme or information, being put out towards a male candidate. And so again, it's just like reinforcing that thing where all a woman is apparently good for, and all of her boils down to just being some sort of like sexual object. I
Mhm.
it's crazy. You think of like how far we've come, but yet stuff like that is still out there. Um Now I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So is there anything else that you want to cover uh or talk about?
Well, so one thing I like to make a point of is that the after is great.
Mhm.
When you're in the middle of it, it's horrible. And when you're trying to get out, you're in deep danger because that is the most dangerous time is when you're trying to get out. And I tell people all the time that you want to make a go bag. And the go bag has a spare set of car keys and the kids' diapers and your medication and some cash. And you walk out the door. You don't run around trying to gather those things in the heat of a fight
Mhm.
because that escalates. So you want to have a go bag and you want to understand that once you get through it and you heal, you get to have a full and happy life. It's not true that you're not lovable. It's not true that you'll be alone for the rest of your life, although I suggest being alone for a while so you can get yourself centered and authentic before you try to partner with somebody else. But the after can be fantastic. You can hear a garage door open and not clench.
Mhm.
You can be friends with whomever you want to be friends with. You can manage your money however you want to manage your money. It's amazing how great it can be when you're out, but it's super hard to see that when you're in. So I just try to remind people of that it's not always going to be like this if you choose to get out.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. It's like there is a life on the other side of it, and you're not going to be this, untouchable, like, quote unquote battered woman. You are going to be just like everyone else. And I think that's also important for people to understand, is that, like, domestic violence survivors, they're everywhere, and them. They are, they're in school with you, you work with them, you might not know it, but they are just normal people, and they're all over the place. And I think it's so important to keep telling these stories. So I want to thank you so much for your time being on here to talk about this. uh, I will link to your book, because it was phenomenal, and tragic, but it was so well written. And so I want to thank you so much again for taking the time today.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure.
Yes.
Have a good day.
You too. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there, or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself.